Hi, my name is Dr. John Douillard and welcome to LifeSpa.com. Recently I've written a lot of articles talking about Nobel Prize winning science and Ayurvedic medicine. And it turns out there actually are quite a few Nobel Prize winning studies that directly support Ayurvedic wisdom. Here at LifeSpa, that's what we do. We write about ancient Ayurvedic wisdom and modern science. If there's something that's been practiced for 1,000 years or 100 years, and we can find science to prove it, that's what we write about here at LifeSpa.com. So please, join our family because there's so much great information that we put out weekly about the ancient medical wisdom, which is often forgotten, and the modern science, which really does validate it. So anyway, I wrote this article citing about 6 of the more recent Nobel Prize winning studies that directly link to Ayurvedic medicine. So that's what this talk is going to be about. I'm going to kind of dive into that. Really quick, the Nobel Prize, just so you know, was developed by a guy named Alfred Nobel, who was the guy who invented dynamite, actually. He was a nitroglycerin chemist and then figured out a way to make dynamite. And when he passed away, he bequeathed his estate basically to people who could change the world, make the world a better place. And the studies I'm going to look into here today are the ones only in the field of physiology or medicine. That's only one of the 5 areas of the Nobel Prize. I intend to dig into all of the different disciplines in the Nobel Prize, but for now we're going to stick with just the physiology and medicine aspect of the Nobel Prize. The first one was in 2019, and they studied how cells can sense and adapt to changing levels of oxygen, higher levels or lower levels of oxygen. There's a hormone in our body called EPO, erythropoietin, that makes red blood cells when the oxygen levels drop down. That's basically the same hormone that Lance Armstrong got busted for injecting when he won and then got stripped of his 7 world or Tour de France medals, right? So it's a really important hormone. And this whole Nobel Prize study came out in 2019 has a lot to do with the understanding that the amount of oxygen in our blood and the amount of oxygen in our cells can dramatically change. And we have these mechanisms to adjust for it. Well, this is something that Ayurveda talked about thousands of years ago. And I've written an article about this going into much more detail than I will be able to go into here because I'm going to try to get into all 6 of these Nobel studies. But so the idea in Ayurvedic breathing techniques is that Kumbhak, or breath retention or breath holding, was considered by Patanjali and the Hatha Yoga Pradipika to be really the premise of pranayama. It wasn't a pranayama if it didn't have a breath hold involved. And when you hold your breath, you increase levels of CO2. When CO2 levels rise, that triggers the release of the oxygen from your blood into your tissues. And there is a thing called tissue hypoxia, which is linked to a host of health-related degenerative concerns like increased mutagenic stem cells, which cause a lot of damage. And so it's really important that not only we have oxygen saturation in our blood, right? You go to the doctor, they put an oximeter on your finger, you're 98% saturated blood. That's great, oxygen in your blood. But how much oxygen do you have in your tissues? That's the question. And as we age, we become more tissue hypoxic. It's one of the risks and vulnerabilities of age-related degenerative concerns, which can be mitigated by strengthening the muscles that get weak over time, which is your muscles of breathing. Your diaphragm, which is the big muscle of inspiration, contracts, and when it contracts, it pulls air into this balloon called your lungs. And as soon as you relax the diaphragm, whoosh, all the air gets squished out. And as we sit around more than we do and not exercise as much as we should, when you sit, particularly, we sit in a slouched position, the rib cage jams the diaphragm into a downward pre-contracted position. So we have no choice but to not have our diaphragm contracting fully and relaxing fully, which means the rib cage never fully opens and closes. One study showed with elite athletes, half of them did not have a diaphragm contracting and relaxing fully. Chances are they don't have it, you and I don't have it. So we need to strengthen our diaphragm. And when you strengthen your diaphragm, you start breathing longer, deeper, slower. And breath retention, or slowing down your breath, all of that allows CO2 levels time to build up. And when the CO2 levels build up, then that releases the oxygen from your blood into your tissues and hyperoxygenation oxygenates, heals, and repairs your tissues. This means that the oxygen in your blood starts to go down a little bit as the oxygen in your cells go up. That is called intermittent hypoxia in your blood. And the studies on intermittent hypoxia have written about that as well. This is all about this Nobel Prize winning science. When you do breath holds or slow your breath down, you move into a state of intermittent hypoxia when your blood temporarily goes into the 80s in terms of oxygen saturation. And we have increased stem cell activation, healthy, good stem cells, increased EPO, erythropoietin, which is the Lance Armstrong hormone. You have increased lower blood pressure, lower blood sugar. You have increased transcription factors that protect your genome, called the guardian of your genome, endothelial growth factors that protect the inside of your lining, the inside of your lining of your arteries. You have increased nitric oxide, which was a Nobel Prize winning study in 1998 that I'm going to talk about in a minute, which was like the panacea molecule that cured everything that we're still talking about today, 20 some odd years later, right? So that was the first one. Critically important, how we understand now how important it is for us to breathe. And that study was done in 2019. In 2018, the Nobel Prize was won when they discovered a protein that puts the brakes on our immune system that doesn't allow us to identify and attach to or address cancer cells. And I did a podcast on cancer with Zach Bush that you may want to read about, where I talk about the Ayurvedic principles that go into depth, and I write about this in this article about Nobel Prize winning Ayurvedic science as well. The premise in Ayurveda from the cancer perspective is that the cells lose their memory of proper function, and they lose their connection to the whole. So the premise in Ayurveda is to restore the memory of the whole. Well, when the cancer cells put out a protein that puts the brakes on the immune system, so the immune system can't address the whole, they can only address certain parts of the body, and they leave out these cancer cells to go rogue, then this becomes a problem. So they developed a protein, they identified a protein that allowed them to remove the brakes or release the brakes on the immune system for them to attach to these proteins. Really quite brilliant, and the studies are showing it's brand new science, but the studies are showing it works really well on cancer. But this kind of again just reinforces the idea that what Ayurveda said with the treatment for cancer was all about was to restore the memory of proper function to the cells. Restore the memory of proper function to the immune cells so they can recognize the problem as problems and address that issue. Now, in addition, the cancer cells, by the definition, have also lost their memory of the whole. They started functioning as independent parts, independent of the whole, and they become rogue. Usually, from the Ayurvedic perspective, that was due to a lack of communication. You want to restore memory, you communicate better. And the communication we're talking about is blood in, nutrients in, and waste or lymphatic flow out. If you can't get the blood in, can't get the waste out, the cell's going to eventually not have what it needs to divide and become two new healthy new cells. So they morph and they do a survival program which allows them to stay alive, but independent from the whole. And the Ayurvedic principle here is, restore the memory of the whole. The body recognizes the problem as a problem and heals the self. And that was the Nobel Prize winning science to remove the brakes of the immune system so we can identify the whole as opposed to just some parts in its immune response. Really, really cool, and that was the Nobel Prize winning study for 2018. In 2017, they did research on circadian medicine. Now, I've talked about that a lot. I have a whole free ebook on circadian medicine you can get for free. The idea that the Nobel Prize science was on the fact that circadian medicine, circadian rhythms were connected to our biological clocks. That we have biological clocks in our body that have to be in sync with the light-dark cycles of nature. In Ayurveda, this is what we call Ayurveda 101. I did a whole Yoga Journal video series on this, which is all about yoga and breathing and meditation in different seasons. In Ayurveda, we have something called Ritu Charya, which is seasonal behavioral lifestyle changes, and Dinacharya, which is daily lifestyle changes. These are all connected to the circadian rhythms, the light-dark cycles, the biological clocks. I have links in the article associated with this video to the articles that I've written about circadian medicine and the ebook that you can get, which is really, really important. You know, we now know that the biological clocks determine when we can eat and benefit from our food, when we should go to sleep, when we should wake up, when we should exercise, when certain medicines or herbs should be taken according to the biological circadian clocks that turn on and turn off to support better functioning of those herbs, right? Seasonal cycles. We know that there's bugs in the soil that change from one season to the next, that attach to the plants, that change and morph the potential chemical healing potential of those plants. And when you eat those foods with the bugs or the herbs on them, and the bugs and the herbs and the bugs and the plants and the foods all together, you're actually creating, you know, what nature intended, which was something where the bugs were inoculating your gut with the rhythms of nature, because the bugs are instilled with those light-dark cycles because they come from the soil. You put it in your mouth, you eat those foods, you're again inoculating and resetting those biological clocks. This fascinating, fascinating study. Absolutely, the principle here Ayurvedically is go downstream with the rhythm of nature. Don't try to go against the grain. Don't ignore your biological clocks and get out of sync with Mother Nature. She's a powerful force not to be messed with. In 2016, the Nobel Prize went on something called autophagy. When you eat less food, it increases, like during fasting states, it increases the cellular repair and cellular recycling, called autophagy. Won the Nobel Prize. Well, in Ayurveda, the whole point of this, and from Western medicine, we know that the most powerful studies on health are something called calorie restriction without starvation, or intermittent fasting, or time-restricted eating, eating less food, right? Not so much food. One survey showed that Americans eat 100% of the food that they need, then they go and eat another 100% of food they don't actually need. And when studies showed that you would take 30% or even 20% less food, we eat 20 to 30% less food of the 100% extra that we actually eat that we don't even need, right? And you eat that, all kinds of health benefits, metabolic syndrome, you know, cholesterol levels, blood pressure, blood sugar, weight gain, all these concerns that we have disappear when we just eat less food. You know, in Ayurveda, there's an old saying that says 1 meal a day is for a yogi, which was always, of course, the most revered person in Indian culture. 2 meals a day, was for a laborer, called a bogi. So 1 meal a day for a yogi, 2 meal a day for a bogi, which is a laborer, person who's lifting bricks and working really hard, needs more food. And then 3 meals a day is for a rogi, a person in a hospital, sick, mostly dead, right? So for the people who are sick, you eat 3 meals a day. 3 meals a day. They don't even have a name for people who eat 4, 5, or 6 meals a day and snack all day long. So the whole idea in Ayurveda was to eat, you know, less food. 2 meals a day is generally fine. 3 meals a day is okay, but as you become better at delivering food and stabilizing blood sugar and burning fat as your source of fuel, not only your fine sugars, you can usually survive pretty well on just 2 good meals per day. And that's going to link up to all the health-related science, which is really really important. So in the article, I wrote an article, you know, I wrote a book called The 3-Season Diet, which I introduced and I have a free ebook called The Sugar or the Weight Balancing Diet, Weight Balancing ebook, which is all about Ayurvedic intermittent fasting, which is a breakfast and a lunch and a light building up to no supper over time. And the details, or you can read about that in the article connected to this video, which is pretty cool. Okay, back in 2009, they did studies, and Elizabeth Blackburn did a study on telomeres, which are the chromosomal caps that shrink as we age and shrink faster when you're stressed out. And the studies show that people who are super stressed out have shorter telomeres that relate to even a decade of accelerated aging compared to people who aren't so stressed out. And then Elizabeth Blackburn said, well, if your lifespan is measured by the shortening of your telomeres, the chromosomal caps on your DNA, then what if we did something that was known for thousands of years to get rid of stress, called meditation, which is a bold move for a Nobel Prize winning scientist to study meditation, which was she got a lot of heat for that, let's say, clearly. Well, anyway, she then started publishing a study on meditations. started publishing studies on meditation and found that the telomeres lengthened or slowed their shortening rather by 30% in one study and 43% in another study using meditation as the tool to help protect our telomeres from shortening, directly linked to the aging process. And that won the Nobel Prize in 2009 rather. In 1998, that was the nitric oxide study, one of my favorite studies of all, because studies show that when you breathe through your nose, you make nitric oxide through the paranasal sinuses. When you breathe through your mouth, you do zero. And that was my first love, my first book called Body, Mind, and Sport, where I wrote a book about nose breathing versus mouth breathing during exercise. We published studies of that in the International Journal of Neuroscience, and we found that when people breathe through their nose, their brain waves go into a calm, meditative, coherent state. Their perception of the same workload is dramatically less. Their breath rates go from 48 breaths per minute mouth breathing to 14 breaths per minute nose breathing, doing the same amount of vigorous exercise. The research was quite phenomenal, and I've been promoting and talking about nose breathing for ever since when the book came out way back in 1994. So something to really understand is the value of nitric oxide. Nitric oxide won the Nobel Prize in 1998 as the panacea molecule related to heart disease, and they've since linked it to healing pretty much everything. Having the right amount of nitric oxide is critical. One Ayurvedic breathing technique called Brahmari, where you actually hum, increases the production of nitric oxide by 15 times. So read the pranayama article on Brahmari at LifeSpa.com. Check that out. But there's so many ways I talk about and so many articles about how we boost nitric oxide. There's herbs that boost nitric oxide. There's so many things we now know that are all linked to Ayurvedic principles that I think are just quite fascinating. So there you have it, 6 powerful Nobel Prize winning studies, all directly linked to really powerful and profound Ayurvedic principles. All right, see you all next week. Thanks for listening. I'm Dr. John Douillard. Do you like this video? Don't forget to subscribe and share.
This recording is brought to you by LifeSpa, where ancient Ayurvedic wisdom meets modern science. Get access to free health video newsletters by Dr. John at LifeSpa.com. These statements have not been evaluated by the FDA. These products are not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease.